Hello all and welcome back to the Ant Foundation Practicast. How many times have you looked at our apartments and cringed? If you have not, you're welcome to visit my apartment. But worry not, for Christine DeFato is back with another Practicast episode where she's giving us tips on how to keep things clean and tidy. So get those vacuums ready, folks.
Welcome to today's Practicast episode. We're going to talk about house cleaning. Definitely not one of the most exciting topics, but unfortunately, it's very necessary. For today's episode, you need to have a piece of paper and your imagination. As usual, we're not going to talk about every detail of how to clean a house. We're mainly going to talk about method. So, let's do an experiment. First, take your piece of paper. If you are listening to this and you can see, now is the time to close your eyes. Okay, first lay your paper flat and try to find the middle of it. Make a small crease where you think the middle is. Okay, now let's fold the paper in half widthwise. I'm doing a horrible job at this, by the way. Okay, and now fold it in half longwise. Okay, now if you open up your paper, you can see where you thought the middle was and where the actual middle of the paper was. I was actually kind of close. Kind of. Okay, now the point of doing that was not just to have fun folding paper, which I admit is very amusing, but it was more to show that if you're working with a wide open space, it's very difficult to be completely thorough about it. Whereas if you break it up into smaller rectangles or other geometric shapes, it's much easier to have a clear idea of the space that you're working with. So, when you go to clean a room, the first thing I usually do is, the first thing actually is to clean off the floor. Especially if you're vacuuming, I advise picking up all the socks. I don't even want to tell you how many vacuum belts I've hurt because I vacuumed up socks. So anyway, the next step is to think about the space that you're working with. For the sake of an example, I'm going to tell you about my room. My room is basically a square shape, and there's a bed in the middle of one wall with the head against the wall. And so it sticks out into the main part of the room. To the left of the bed, when you're looking at it, there's a desk, and to the right, against the adjacent wall, is a dresser. So this room is not a wide open square. It has the bed breaking up the middle, and it has the dresser against one wall. So that wall is also not clear. So what we're going to do first is think about the smaller rectangles. There's one to the left of the bed, between the bed and the wall, that has the desk at the end of it. There's also a long rectangle at the end of the bed. And then there are two smaller rectangles to each side of the dresser. So when you are getting ready to vacuum a room, you can take these rectangles into consideration and work on each separately. And this way you know that you have covered all of the space that you have. Okay, now I'm going to describe a method that you can use, whether you're vacuuming or using a mop or wiping a counter or the window or a wall in the shower. It's all basically the very same technique. So let's use our piece of paper again. So I'm going to start at the very top left corner of the paper, and I'm going to break this rectangle down into even smaller rectangles, just in my mind though. You can fold it if you want. And I'm going to start at the top left, because I tend to work left to right, and I'm going to pretend that my finger is the vacuum, and I'm going to draw it toward me, just about an inch, and then I'm going to move it back to the edge of the paper, and toward me again, and then back to the edge of the paper. Each time I push it away from me to the edge, I'm going to move it over just a little bit, so that it's covering the old space and also starting to cover a new space. I'm going to do that until this little section of the rectangle is covered. Then I'm going to pretend that I'm stepping back on the piece of paper, and I'm going to do the same thing for the next bit. And so this way, I'm covering every bit of that rectangle, from edge to edge, and the whole center part. This, as I said, is the same technique that you would use on a countertop, or if you're washing a window. Now there are two things to be aware of. If you are wiping a countertop, it's very easy for this back and forth motion to turn into a circular motion, which just means that you're probably pushing breadcrumbs and stickiness in circles, which doesn't really make it clean. So you want to be careful that you're really going from back to front and not in a circular spiral motion. The other thing is, especially with windows or any other very shiny surface, it's easy to leave streaks. Unfortunately, there's not really an easy solution to this, except being really thorough, very constant, and not touching. So, for example, if I were doing a window, I would spray a paper towel or rag or whatever I'm using to wipe it, and I would start at the top left, just as I did with the piece of paper, and I would pretend that that window was many smaller squares or strips or rectangles. And I would use that same motion, this time up and down, because the window hopefully is vertical. And I would try my absolute best not to touch it with my hand. And I would just have to trust that that motion, that up and down motion, is covering all of the space on the glass. Also with windows, you have to be careful of that bottom section, because that's where you have the cleaning liquid drip and dry, which also turns into streaks or bits of dust collect there. So just another thing to be aware of. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is how to make a bed. This is somewhat related to house cleaning, of course, but mainly I want to talk about it because it involves the same kind of spatial orientation that we discussed when we talked about vacuuming and like cleaning windows. Moreover, it involves using your hands to really measure the space to make sure that things line up and that they're straight. So first, let's pretend that you've just washed your clothes and you're taking the sheets out of the dryer and they smell lovely and they're warm, and you want to put them on your bed. So let's take the bottom sheet and find the corner seam. And we're going to take the seam and line it up with the corner of the mattress and pull it over and down. We're going to do this on all four corners. It doesn't really matter which you do first or second, as long as by the end they're all on and pulled down over the mattress. So that's not too hard. The next step is a bit more tricky. we're going to take our top sheet, which is the flat sheet, and we're going to find the bottom edge, the part that goes at the foot of the bed. You can usually tell which part goes at the foot of the bed because the hem will be narrower. Usually the part that goes at the top is 2 or 3 inches wide. But of course, this varies according to which sheet you have. So we're going to stand at the end of the bed and take a corner of the sheet in each hand and kind of shake it over the bed like a parachute. This kind of helps it to spread out and distribute across the mattress a little bit. Next, we're going to pull it down over the end of the bed and just smooth it out across the end. And we're going to use our hands to measure how far it is from the floor or how far it is from the bottom of the bed frame. It depends how long your sheet is and how large your mattress is. So it doesn't matter how long it hangs, it just needs to be straight across. So let's use our hands. My sheet, for example, should hang just one length of my hand. So from my wrist to the end of my middle finger, that's the distance that it should be between the bottom of the sheet and the floor. Some sheets will reach all the way to the floor though, and some will be considerably shorter, so just experiment. Next, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to go up the sides of the bed, and we're going to pull the sheet down over the sides and make sure that it's nice and flat all the way across the bed so that we don't leave any of these little mischievous wrinkles. And we're going to check that it's even on each side, so it should be the same distance from the floor on both sides of the bed, all the way from the foot to the head. Next, we're going to tuck the bottom part under the mattress, just at the foot of the bed, and also the corners, because these tend to hang quite long. Now, the next step is optional, as is making beds in general, but it's taking the bit of the sheet that's right near the head of the bed and folding it back. They do this often in hotels, and it's pretty typical when you're making your bed to fold this part back. You can also fold it over the blanket. It's just up to you. Again, you have to measure and make sure that this is straight. The distance between the folded part and the edge of the sheet. It's very easy to do this on an angle so that there's 2 inches folded over on one side and 6 on the other. So again, just use your hands, check it, make sure it's nice and even. I'll leave the rest of it, putting the blanket on, I'll leave that to you. It's basically following the same process. Finally though, we want to put the pillow into the pillowcase. So we're going to take the pillowcase and first of all make sure it's right side out and find the corners and then more or less just stuff the pillow in and then hold it with one hand on the outside and reach in, all the way in with your other hand and find the corners and pull the corners of the pillow into the corners of the pillowcase and then kind of shake it into place. You'll know when it's right because the seams of the pillowcase will line up with the edges of the pillow and it will be securely all the way down into the case. Now you can flop it on the bed, and if it's nighttime, you can go to sleep. So to recap, today we talked about breaking larger spaces into smaller ones, and we talked about a method to clean many surfaces, and we talked about making a bed and using your hands to really determine whether something is straight and lined up. If you have any questions about what we covered, or if you want to know how to clean something else that we didn't talk about, feel free to email me at christine@nfoundation.org. Thank you for listening. Bye.